Hello, and thank you for contacting Wave Support. I see from your clinical request you got a very challenging patient here and a challenging cornea to work with. And unfortunately, I can feel for you. These are some of the most frustrating cases. With all best intentions, you try to help them by pursuing LASIK, and then when you go back to what you think would be a pretty straightforward return to lens wear, you end up with a challenge. So unfortunately, these can be very, very, very challenging. But if we look at your designs here, as far as the original design, what probably most likely happened is you could probably figure when this patient went back to her contact lenses after being out of them for 6 or 8 weeks, this lens probably, this being the steep area, this lens probably slid back down this northern slope on this side. Before that, the cornea was probably sufficiently molded to allow that lens to sit down here a little bit further down. So now you get a lens that's sitting in a different place. It's kind of riding on this side here. And when you do that, it'll cause this bottom part of the lens to kind of lift up, creating your flaring up that you've experienced. And because it's not sitting in the same place, it's probably rotating differently, either warping, although it's a pretty thick lens. Flexing is probably not as likely, but it's probably just sliding or rotating in a different position, thus creating some of that blur that you noticed. And that would also account for some of the unpredicted overrefractions that you got. And so I'm actually quite impressed that you're able to get such clarity after adding some compounded refractions in, because sometimes, as you know, those can be very challenging. But a couple thoughts to kind of get that back in place. I will say sometimes what I find with these, and I've had through past experience weird corneas that just aren't predictable. Sometimes I find I have to just go back, instead of adding little adjustments or little changes on top of other changes, sometimes I find myself just going back to a fresh brand new lens, fresh brand new lens design with the most updated numbers, and sometimes that'll get me there a little bit more quickly. And I find that a lot of the rules just go out the window when you do these. But if we look at your design, a couple of things you can do. One thought is you could just go, if you've been pretty happy with this, I know you've worked very hard to get this lens to give pretty good acuity the way it is, you could just go through with your design and try to manually work on those areas. For example, maybe reduce the flare in the bottom 50%. You can maybe click on that, and if you just bring that blue dot down in that lower quadrant, just kind of bring that down so it doesn't lift up as much. And then try to go over here and maybe increase a little bit of the, you said it's a little bit tight fitting lens, so maybe loosen up here a little bit around the sides. Remember, you have to kind of go in free form, you have to go into each meridian. Up here we're not too bad, maybe just go back to 100% and just increase everything a little bit here. So that has the effect of just giving you more of a flattened lens. Another thought, and I kind of looked at this design. This is one I kind of mocked up here. It's basically the exact same design that you started with. If you click over here toward RSEAM, you kind of get the overall average base curve of this lens. And I know it's not exact, but that kind of gives the idea that this is about a 798 or 80 base curve for this lens, if you were to do that just spherical, sort of the overall average. If you've seen this little tool over here, I'd like to try to get the back surface of this lens to match the front surface of that cornea a little more closely. And this little aspheric tool here has been very helpful in doing that. And if you kind of notice when I click on that, this back surface now comes very close to matching the back surface or the front surface of that cornea. So the hope here is that you get a lens that will want to more fit like a glove, as opposed to have, not quite matching here. We get this lens a little more matched. It just kind of slides right into place over that cone. And now what did you notice if you go over here and look at the overall average of that thing? We've become notably flatter, so that actually flattens up this lens a little bit. So, sometimes I found little tricks like that can be helpful in trying to get this lens to more closely match that cornea. I think I would probably try one of those two approaches, and that'll help get you back on track. The other thought, if you stumble too much, I would probably say, especially if you start running some refractive issues because of the compounding over refractions, sometimes you might just have to go back, as I mentioned earlier, and start from scratch. Just get a fresh, nicely fit lens on this cornea. Start out with the basic refractive powers, and then get a nicely fit lens. And when it's sitting nicely on there, get the fit down first, and then add in the final refraction on top of that. and that way you don't induce extra compounding cylinders by lenses that are sliding in one direction or rotating around. Well, with that said, I wish you well in this case. These are very, very challenging. Try not to get too frustrated. A lot of this trial and error, as you know, but I'm sure you'll be successful, as it sounds like you've done quite well with this patient up to this point. So I wish you well, and thank you for contacting Wave Support, and have a great day.